Some women are born survivors, others are forged in fire. When Catherine Walsh buried her husband in the frozen New Mexico dirt, she thought the worst was over. She was wrong. What came next wasn't grief, it was a siege. Men she'd never spoken to lined up at her door with rings and contracts, treating her like property up for auction. The town called her foolish for refusing, reckless, doomed. But Catherine had survived one man's fists. She'd be damned if she'd trade them for another's control. This is her story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Catherine's fight travels. The day Thomas Walsh died, the sky stayed blue. Catherine thought that was the cruelest part. No storm, no blood-red sunset, no sign from the heavens that her husband's body lay crushed beneath 2 tons of timber in the north pasture. Just endless, cheerful blue stretching over the scrubland like nothing had changed at all. She stood in the yard watching the men carry him past, his body wrapped in canvas so old it had gone gray. Dust coated everything, her boots, her dress, the faces of the neighbors who'd come to help. Someone was talking to her, their mouth moving, but the words slid past like water. Her hands hung at her sides, too heavy to lift. "Mrs. Walsh?" The voice belonged to Jacob Garrett, who owned the feed store. His hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching. "Mrs. Walsh, do you have someone who can stay with you? Family, perhaps?" Catherine blinked. The question felt absurd. Family. Her mother had been dead 12 years, her father longer. Thomas had made sure she wrote no letters, kept no friends close enough to matter. That was the point of places like this. Isolation dressed up as independence. "I'll manage," she said. Garrett's face did something complicated. Pity and doubt wrestled there, and she hated both equally. "Of course," he said, backing away like she might bite. "Of course you will." The funeral happened 3 days later at the church on the edge of town, a tired building that smelled like old wood and older hypocrisy. Reverend Pritchard spoke about mercy and the mysteries of the Lord's plan, his voice rolling through the sparse crowd like he was trying to convince himself. Catherine sat in the front pew, back straight, hands folded, giving them nothing. She could feel their eyes on her, counting, measuring, already calculating what she was worth. 26 years old. No children. A failing ranch with more debt than cattle. A woman alone was a problem here, and problems needed solving. The first proposal came before Thomas was cold in the ground. Martin Coyle appeared at her door the evening after the funeral, hat in his weathered hands, his smile too wide for the occasion. He was 60 if he was a day, with tobacco-stained teeth and land that bordered hers to the west. "Mrs. Walsh." He nodded like they were old friends. "Terrible business, just terrible. Your husband was a good man." Thomas hadn't been a good man. Thomas had been a drunk who used his fists when words failed him, which was often, but Martin Coyle didn't know that, or didn't care, and Catherine wasn't about to educate him. "What do you want?" she asked. His smile flickered. "Well now, no need to be cold. I've come with a proposition, a solution to your situation." "My situation. A woman can't run a ranch alone." He said it like fact, like gravity. "It's not natural, not safe. You need a man's hand here, Mrs. Walsh, and I'm prepared to offer mine. Marry me. I'll take on your debts, manage the land properly, and you'll want for nothing." Catherine stared at him. The gall of it nearly stole her breath. "I buried my husband this morning," she said slowly. I know. Martin waved a hand like she was being dramatic. "But practicality waits for no one. Think about it. My land plus yours? We'd have the biggest spread in the county. You'd be taken care of." "Get off my property." His face hardened. "You're making a mistake." "I've made plenty. One more won't kill me." She shut the door in his face and stood there, shaking, until she heard his horse ride away. But Martin Coyle was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, they came like locusts. Young men and old, widowers and bachelors, some she recognized from town and others she'd never seen before. Each one had the same offer wrapped in different words. Marriage as transaction, safety as cage. Henry Bullock offered her stability and God's grace. Samuel Chen promised she'd never have to work again. Even Peter Larson, barely 22 and still pimpled, showed up stammering about duty and partnership, though his eyes kept dropping to her neckline. She turned them all away. The town noticed. Heard Catherine Walsh rejected another one. she overheard in Miller's general store, two women whispering near the canned goods. That's what, 5 now? 6, the other corrected. Martin, Henry, Samuel, Peter, that Clayton boy, and just yesterday, William Thorne. What's wrong with her? William's got money, a fine house. She could do worse. Pride, the first woman said with certainty. She thinks she's better than honest proposals. Mark my words, she'll come crawling back when winter sets in and she's starving. Catherine kept walking, kept her face blank, kept her basket light because she could only afford flour and salt anyway. Let them talk. Their opinions couldn't hurt her worse than Thomas's fists had. But the land could. The ranch, if you could call it that, sprawled across 200 acres of stubborn New Mexico scrubland. The house was barely standing, more gaps than walls in places. The barn leaned like a drunk. Fences sagged. The cattle, what few remained, were skinny and mean. Thomas had let it all rot while he drank himself useless, and now Catherine stood in the middle of the wreckage, trying to figure out where to even start. She began with the fences. Every morning at dawn, she walked the property line with wire and posts, her hands bleeding through gloves that were already more whole than fabric. The work was brutal. The posts fought the rocky soil, the wire cut her palms, and her back screamed by noon. But she kept going, because this pain, this exhaustion, this struggle was hers. Not given, not controlled, not contingent on pleasing someone else. The townspeople watched her efforts with the kind of fascination usually reserved for accidents. Some shook their heads, others made bets on how long she'd last. Stubborn as a mule, Jacob Garrett told anyone who'd listen. But stubbornness doesn't feed cattle or fix roofs. He wasn't wrong. The first real problem hit 3 weeks after Thomas died. The cattle, 12 head of mangy, half-wild beef, broke through the east fence and scattered into the hills. Catherine spent 2 days tracking them down on foot because she couldn't afford to keep Thomas's horse fed. She found 8. The other 4 were just gone. Then the roof started leaking. Then the well pump broke. Then the bank sent a letter. Catherine sat at the kitchen table, really just warped planks on sawhorses, and read the letter 3 times, the words refusing to change. Outstanding debt, $347. Payment due, November 1st. Failure to pay will result in foreclosure. November 1st was 6 weeks away. She had $8 to her name. Her hands started shaking, and she hated them for it. She'd survived Thomas. She'd survived the proposals, the gossip, the sheer weight of trying to hold this place together with spit and determination. But numbers didn't care about survival. Numbers just were. She could sell the cattle. That might get her $60 if she was lucky and the buyer was drunk. Sell the house? Nobody wanted a shack with more problems than rooms. The land itself had value, but selling it meant losing everything. And what would she do then? Beg one of those men to reconsider? Live on charity in a town that already despised her choices? Catherine pressed her palms against her eyes until light sparked. Think, she whispered. Think. But the only thought that came was dark and familiar. Maybe they were right. Maybe I can't do this. She shoved it away. Morning came cold and gray, October announcing itself with frost that killed what was left of her pathetic garden. Catherine stood in the yard, breath misting, and surveyed her kingdom of ruin. The barn door hung crooked. The chicken coop had 3 chickens left, down from 12. The fence she'd spent weeks repairing already sagged in 2 places. And she was so tired. Mrs. Walsh! She spun, heart jumping. A man stood at the edge of her property, tall and lean, his hat pulled low. He raised one hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or apology. Didn't mean to startle you, he said. Catherine's hand moved instinctively to her hip, where Thomas used to keep a gun, but the gun was long-soled, and her hip was empty. Who are you? She demanded. Robert Jackson. He stayed where he was, didn't advance. I've got the spread about 5 miles south, near the canyon. She knew the place. Decent land, or it had been. She'd heard it was struggling too, though not as badly as hers. What do you want? The question came out harsh. She was so sick of men wanting things. Robert Jackson tilted his head slightly, considering. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost careful. Nothing, he said. I was riding the fence line and saw you working. Thought I'd check if you needed help. I don't. All right. He nodded. Easy. No argument. Started to turn away. Wait. He stopped. Catherine didn't know why she'd spoken, but he was already here, and the barn door had been mocking her for days, and pride was expensive when you were alone. The barn, she heard herself say. The hinge broke. I don't have the tools to fix it properly. Robert looked past her to the barn, then back. I've got tools, he said. Won't take long. He worked in silence, his movements efficient and unhurried. Catherine watched from the porch, suspicious, waiting for the catch. Men didn't help for free. There was always a price. But Robert Jackson just fixed the hinge, tested the door twice, then gathered his tools. Should hold now, he said. What do I owe you? He looked genuinely confused. Nothing. Everyone wants something. Not today. He touched the brim of his hat. Good luck, Mrs. Walsh. He rode away before she could respond, disappearing into the scrubland like he'd been a mirage. Catherine stood there, off balance, trying to make sense of what had just happened. 2 days later, he came back. This time he brought fence wire, good wire, new wire, the kind that cost actual money. He left it by her gate without a word, and when she ran out to stop him, he was already riding away. I didn't ask for this, she shouted. He turned in his saddle. I know. Why? Does it matter? Yes! Robert Jackson studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Because you're trying, he said finally. And trying shouldn't be this hard alone. Then he was gone again, and Catherine was left holding fence wire she desperately needed and absolutely didn't want to accept. The third time he appeared, she was ready. Stop, she said the moment she saw him. Just stop. I don't need your charity. It's not charity. Then what is it? Robert dismounted, slow and deliberate, keeping his distance like she was a spooked horse. Neighborly, he said. Neighbors don't give away supplies. Some do. What's your price? Catherine demanded. Marriage? The land? What? His expression shifted, not quite hurt, but something adjacent. May I just sit with you? He asked. The question was so unexpected that Catherine actually stumbled back a step. What? Sit, Robert repeated. Just sit on your porch. For a while. No talking if you don't want, no expectations. Just company. That's insane. Maybe, he shrugged, but I'm asking anyway. Catherine wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed to send him away, to maintain her walls, to stay safe in her isolation. But there was something in his voice, something genuine and patient and so unlike every other man who darkened her door, that made her hesitate. Why? She asked, quieter now. Robert Jackson looked at her, really looked, and his answer was simple. Because I think you could use someone who doesn't want to fix you or own you or save you, someone who's just there. The words hit something deep, something Catherine hadn't known was still tender. 1 hour, she said. 1 hour, he agreed. They sat on her porch steps as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the scrubland in shades of copper and gold. Robert didn't try to talk, didn't ask questions, didn't push. He just sat. And for the first time since Thomas died, maybe for the first time since she'd married him, Catherine felt something loosen in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. The hour passed in silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. When the sun touched the earth, Robert stood, dusted off his pants, and nodded. Same time tomorrow? He asked. Don't push your luck, Catherine said. But the next evening, when she heard hoofbeats, she didn't hide. She walked out to the porch and sat down, and Robert Jackson joined her without a word. It became a pattern. Every evening at sunset he came. Sometimes they talked, shallow things, weather and cattle and the price of grain. Sometimes they didn't. But he was there, steady as clockwork, asking for nothing but her company. The town, predictably, lost its mind. She turned down 6 proposals, but she's entertaining that Jackson fellow every night. I saw them sitting together, shameless. What does she think she's doing? Catherine heard the whispers every time she went to town, saw the looks, felt the judgment like heat. But she'd stopped caring what they thought. Robert Jackson didn't want to control her. Didn't want to marry her or save her or fix her broken ranch. He just showed up, sat quietly, and left when darkness came. It was the strangest thing anyone had ever given her. And somewhere between the silence and the sunsets, Catherine started to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not protected, not owned, not managed, just safe. October deepened, and the cold began to bite. Catherine's finances didn't improve. The bank's deadline crept closer. The cattle continued to be spiteful. The roof still leaked. But every evening, Robert Jackson sat on her porch and made the weight of it all a little lighter. One night, as stars began to prick the darkening sky, he spoke first. "You know people are talking," he said. "Let them." "Doesn't bother you?" Catherine considered. "I spent 3 years with a man who'd hit me for burning dinner. The town's opinions are just noise." Robert went very still beside her. "He hit you," he said carefully. "Not a question. Among other things." The silence stretched. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was tight. "I'm sorry." "Why? You didn't do it." "No, but I'm sorry you survived that. I'm sorry you had to." Something in Catherine's throat went thick. Nobody had ever apologized for what Thomas did. The town had ignored it, excused it, looked away. And here was Robert Jackson, a man she barely knew, offering her something she hadn't realized she needed. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat until full dark, and when Robert finally stood to leave, he paused. "Catherine?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. It sounded strange and right all at once. "Yeah? You're going to make it," he said. "I don't know how yet, but you will." She wanted to believe him. Winter was coming, and with it, a reckoning. The bank, the land, the sheer impossible math of survival. It all waited like wolves at the edge of firelight. But for tonight, sitting on her broken porch with a man who asked for nothing, Catherine Walsh let herself hope. Just a little. Just enough. November came in cold and mean, the kind of cold that found every crack in the walls and settled into your bones. Catherine woke one morning to find ice crusted on the inside of her bedroom window, her breath misting in the gray light. She'd burned the last of the good firewood 3 days ago and was now working through fence posts she'd pulled from the far pasture, wood so old it barely caught. The bank letter sat on the kitchen table where she'd left it, the numbers unchanged by her staring at them. 23 days until foreclosure. Still $8 to her name. She'd sold 2 more cattle to a buyer from Albuquerque who'd smirked at her desperation and offered half what they were worth. She'd taken it anyway. That brought her total to $43. Only 304 to go. The arithmetic made her want to scream. Instead, she pulled on Thomas's old coat, too big in the shoulders, smelling faintly of whiskey and sweat, and went out to check the remaining cattle. 6 head now, scattered across land too poor to sustain them properly. They eyed her with the dull hostility of animals that knew their keeper was failing. "Yeah, well, join the club," Catherine muttered. The wind picked up, cutting through the coat like it wasn't there. Her hands were already numb despite the gloves. Winter was just getting started, and she was already losing. That evening, Robert didn't come. Catherine sat on the porch anyway, watching the horizon, telling herself she wasn't waiting. But as the sun dropped and the cold deepened and the empty road stayed empty, something sank in her chest. Of course. She'd been stupid to expect consistency. Men were reliable right up until they weren't, and Robert Jackson was just a man, after all. She went inside and bolted the door and tried not to feel abandoned. He showed up the next night with no explanation, just settled onto the porch step like he'd never missed a day. "You weren't here yesterday," Catherine said before she could stop herself. "Horse threw a shoe. By the time I walked back and got him sorted, it was too late to ride over." Robert glanced at her. "Should have sent word. I'm sorry." The apology was so simple, so absent of excuse or deflection, that Catherine didn't know what to do with it. "It's fine," she said. "It's not. You thought I wasn't coming back. I didn't think anything." "Catherine." She looked at him then, really looked. His face was tired, lines etched deeper than they should be on a man probably only 35. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred and rough. This was someone who knew hard work, hard seasons, someone who understood failure because he'd tasted it. "Maybe I thought that," she admitted quietly. "Just for a minute." "Fair enough," Robert nodded. "But I'll be here, long as you'll have me." Why? We keep coming back to that question, because you keep not answering it. He smiled, small and sad. Maybe I don't have a good answer yet. Maybe I just know that sitting here feels right, and I'm tired of questioning things that feel right. They sat in silence after that, the cold pressing in from all sides. Catherine's mind wandered to the bank letter, to the impossible numbers, to the very real possibility that in 3 weeks she'd lose everything anyway, and all this defiance would have been for nothing. The bank's foreclosing, she said suddenly. November 1st. Robert went still. How much do you owe? $347. He whistled low. That's steep. Thomas was better at borrowing than paying back. Catherine pulled the coat tighter. I've got $43. I've sold everything I can sell without losing the ability to function entirely. I don't know what else to do. Have you asked the bank for an extension? She laughed, the sound bitter. I'm a woman alone, Robert. They're not interested in extensions. They're interested in selling this land to someone who'll actually make the payments. It's exactly legal. And even if it wasn't, who's going to fight for me? She turned to face him. You? The town that's been waiting for me to fail? There's no help coming. There's just me and math that doesn't work. Robert was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. What if it wasn't just you? Catherine's stomach dropped. No. You don't know what I was going to say. I know exactly what you were going to say, and the answer is no. She stood, anger flaring hot. I'm not marrying you or anyone else to save this place. I'd rather lose it. I wasn't offering marriage. Robert stayed seated, hands still loose on his knees. I was going to suggest a loan. That stopped her. What? A loan? I've got some money saved. Not much, but enough to help. You could pay me back when you're able. Catherine struggled for words. That's insane. You barely know me. I know you're trying to survive something that would have broken most people. I know you'd rather starve than give up your independence. I know you're honest. He shrugged. That's enough. And if I can't pay you back, then we'll figure it out. That's not how loans work. Maybe not at a bank. Robert finally stood, facing her in the near dark. But between neighbors? Between friends? Yeah, that's exactly how they work. Friends. The word felt foreign. Catherine turned it over in her mind, testing the weight of it. I can't accept that, she said. Why not? Because I won't be in debt to another man. I won't owe someone my survival. Robert absorbed that, nodding slowly. All right, I understand. Do you? Yeah, his voice was soft. I do. But Catherine, pride's expensive, and Winter doesn't care about it. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she'd find another way, that she didn't need anyone, that she'd figure it out like she'd figured out everything else. But the words stuck in her throat because they were lies, and they both knew it. Let me think about it, she said finally. Take your time. But time was the one thing she didn't have. The next week brought the first real snow, 3 inches that fell overnight and turned the world white and quiet. Catherine woke to find one of the chickens frozen dead in the coop, and when she went to start a fire, the chimney was blocked by something, probably a bird's nest, and filled the house with smoke instead of heat. She spent 2 hours on the roof in the bitter cold, trying to clear the blockage with a stick while her hands went numb and her eyes watered. When she finally got it clear and stumbled back inside, she sat on the floor and cried for the first time since Thomas died. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet, exhausted tears that she couldn't hold back anymore. She was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of struggling, tired of trying to prove something to people who didn't care if she lived or died. And for what? To keep a ranch that was killing her? To maintain independence that felt more like isolation every day? Maybe they'd all been right. Maybe she should have just married Martin Coyle or Henry Bullock or any of the others and let them deal with the weight of survival. The thought made her sick, but it didn't go away. Robert found her like that, sitting on the floor, tear-stained and covered in soot, the house still cold despite the now working chimney. Door was open, he said from the threshold. I got worried. Catherine didn't have the energy to be embarrassed. Chimney was blocked. He took in the scene, her on the floor, the soot everywhere, her raw hands, and something shifted in his expression. When's the last time you ate? He asked. She couldn't remember. This morning, maybe. That's not an answer. Robert disappeared outside and returned a minute later with his saddlebag. He pulled out bread wrapped in cloth, some kind of dried meat, and an apple. Eat. I don't need... Catherine. His voice was firm. Eat. She ate. The food tasted like nothing, but her body responded anyway, some animal part of her brain recognizing fuel. Robert built up the fire properly while she chewed mechanically, and within 20 minutes the house was warmer than it had been in days. You're good at that, she said. Practice. He sat across from her, his own back against the wall. My wife used to say I could coax fire from wet stones. Catherine's hand paused halfway to her mouth. You were married. Yeah, Sarah. She died 4 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. I'm sorry. Me too. Robert stared at the fire. We'd only been married 2 years. I thought we'd have decades, Make the ranch something real, have kids, grow old. Then one morning she woke up burning up, and 3 days later she was gone. Is that why you sit with me? Catherine asked. Because you're lonely? Partly. He didn't shy from it. But mostly because I recognize the look. The one that says you're drowning, and everyone's just watching from the shore. Did people watch you drown? Some did. Some tried to help, and I pushed them away. I was angry for a long time. Angry at Sarah for dying, angry at myself for not saving her, angry at the whole damn world. Robert's jaw tightened. Took me 2 years to realize that being angry was easier than being sad, and being alone was easier than risking it all again. Catherine set down the bread. So what changed? Nothing. I'm still scared, still angry sometimes, still alone most days. He met her eyes. But I saw you out here fighting the same fight, and I thought maybe it didn't have to be so lonely, for either of us. The honesty of it hit her square in the chest. Here was a man who wasn't pretending to have answers, wasn't offering salvation or control, just company in the struggle. The loan offer still stands, Robert said. No strings, no expectations, just help. Catherine wanted to say yes, but the word caught behind her teeth, trapped by years of learning that help always had a price. I need to think, she said. Okay. He stayed until the fire was steady and the house was warm, then left with the same quiet he always did. Catherine sat in the warmth and tried to untangle what she felt. Trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. The town's judgment intensified as November deepened. Catherine could feel it every time she showed her face at Miller's General Store or the post office. Conversation stopped when she entered. Women turned away. Men stared with open contempt. She was breaking the rules, rejecting good offers, entertaining a widower without supervision, clinging to land she clearly couldn't manage. In their eyes, she was either stubborn or stupid, and neither was forgivable. Mrs. Walsh. Jacob Garrett cornered her by the flour sacks one afternoon. Might I have a word? If it's quick. He glanced around, lowered his voice. I've heard concerning things. About you and Robert Jackson. Have you? He's at your property every evening. People are talking. Let them talk. It's not proper, Garrett insisted. You're a widow. He's a bachelor. Without a chaperone, without marriage intentions. It's none of your business. Catherine picked up a small sack of flour she couldn't afford. Is there anything else? Garrett's face reddened. You're destroying your reputation. My reputation was destroyed the day I turned down Martin Coyle. At least now I'm doing it on my own terms. She paid for the flour with coins she'd found in the couch cushions and walked out into the cold November air. Her hands were shaking again, but not from weakness this time. From rage. These people, these small judgmental people, thought they had a right to her choices. To her life. To her body and her land and her future. And the worst part was that some of them genuinely believed they were helping, protecting her from herself. Hey! Robert was leaning against the post outside the store, his horse tied nearby. You look like you want to hit something. Garrett's concerned about my reputation. Ah. Apparently we're scandalous. Robert's mouth twitched. Should I stop coming by? No? The word came out fierce. You're the only person in this town who treats me like a human being instead of a problem to solve. If that's scandalous, then scandalize me. He smiled then, real and warm. Yes, ma'am. They walked their horses down the main street together, and Catherine could feel every eye on them. She lifted her chin and met their stares. Let them look. Let them judge. She was done caring, but the judgment had teeth. 2 days later, the bank sent another letter. This one wasn't just a reminder. It was a threat, written in cold legal language that basically said, pay or leave. Catherine read it 3 times, each word a nail in the coffin of her independence. November 1st was 10 days away. She had $43 and no prospects for more. The math was done. She'd lost. That night when Robert arrived, she was sitting on the porch with the letter in her lap and something dead in her eyes. Catherine. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it, his face going hard. This is over. She cut him off. It's over. I tried, and I failed, and it's over. No, yes. Catherine stood, the letter falling from her lap. I can't make $300 appear out of thin air, Robert. I've sold everything. I've worked until my hands bled. I've begged the bank for extensions and been denied. There's nothing left to do except accept it. Accept the loan. No. Catherine, please. I said no. The words exploded out of her. Don't you understand? If I take your money, I'm just trading one cage for another. I'll owe you. And owing means depending, and depending means losing control. And I can't do that again. I can't. Robert stood too, his face stricken. It's not like that. I'm not trying to control you. Not yet. But money changes things. Help becomes obligation. Obligation becomes expectation. And I've lived that story already. I'm not Thomas. I know you're not, Catherine's voice cracked. But I'm still me, and I can't forget what I learned. I can't just trust because you've been kind for a few weeks. Trust got me 3 years of bruises and a husband who drank away our future. I won't risk it again. The silence that fell between them was vast and aching. What will you do? Robert asked finally. I don't know. Find work somewhere. Leave New Mexico. Start over. She laughed without humor. Apparently I'm good at starting over. And the ranch? The bank can have it. Let them sell it to someone who knows what they're doing. Robert looked at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. What if it wasn't a loan? Robert, what if it was a partnership? Catherine froze. What? A partnership. You need money. I need... He paused, choosing words. I need a reason to care about something again. My ranch is barely functioning because I stopped giving a damn after Sarah died. I've got money sitting in a bank doing nothing because I can't seem to invest it in my own future. But you've got fight, you've got vision, you know what this land could be. That's insane. Probably. Robert stepped closer. But think about it. We pool resources, combine the ranches, share the work, share the profits, share the risk. You maintain your independence because you're not dependent on me. You're working with me, as an equal. Catherine's mind reeled. That's not how partnerships work between men and women. Then we'll make new rules. The town will lose its mind. The town's already decided you're scandalous. Might as well earn it. She wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed to reject it, to maintain her walls, to keep herself safe through isolation. But as she stood there in the cold November twilight, looking at Robert Jackson's tired, honest face, Catherine realized something. She was going to lose the ranch anyway. That was done. The only question left was whether she lost it while still alone, or whether she took a chance on something different. I want it in writing, she said. Robert blinked. What? A partnership. In writing, legal, with terms that specify equal ownership, equal decision-making, and an exit clause if either of us wants out. Catherine's voice steadied. I'm not doing this on a handshake and good intentions. If we're partners legally, protected. A slow smile spread across Robert's face. Deal. I'm serious. I know, that's why I'm smiling. Most men would balk at giving a woman equal say. You're not most men. No, Robert agreed, I'm not. They shook hands there on the porch, Catherine's small cold hand swallowed by his larger scarred one, and something shifted in the air between them. Not romance, neither of them was ready for that, but possibility, partnership, a third option beyond marriage or solitude. The lawyer in town, Harold Chen, nearly fell out of his chair when they explained what they wanted. A partnership, he repeated slowly, between you and Mrs. Walsh. For both ranches. That's right. Robert sat forward in his chair. Equal ownership, equal profit share, equal say in all decisions. Chen turned to Catherine. Mrs. Walsh, do you understand what this means? You'd be legally binding yourself to Mr. Jackson's debts as well as assets. I understand. And you're comfortable with this arrangement? More comfortable than marriage, Catherine said flatly. Chen's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, but he was professional enough not to comment. Very well. I'll draw up the papers. It'll take a few days. We need it by November 1st, Robert said. That's 6 days away. Then work fast. Chen looked between them, clearly trying to decide if they were brilliant or insane. I'll do my best. They left the office together and Catherine felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. Hope was still too dangerous. But maybe its younger sibling, possibility. You really think this can work? She asked as they walked to where their horses were tied. I think we're both too stubborn to let it fail, Robert said. That's got to count for something. Stubbornness isn't a business plan. No, but it's a start. The town's reaction to the partnership was exactly as explosive as Catherine had predicted. Within hours of them visiting Chen's office, the news had spread like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone had an opinion. It's improper, declared Mrs. Henderson at the church social. It's brilliant, countered Samuel Chen's wife. She keeps her land and gets help. He gets a functioning ranch again. What's wrong with that? Everything. A man and woman in business together? Without marriage? It's indecent. Catherine heard about it secondhand from Robert, who'd stopped by the saloon for a drink and gotten an earful from half the town's men. Martin Coyle says you've bewitched me, Robert reported, amused. Henry Bullock thinks I'm a fool. Peter Larson just looked confused. And what do you think? Catherine asked. I think we're going to prove them all wrong. The papers were ready on October 30th, the day before the bank's deadline. Catherine and Robert sat in Chen's office as the lawyer walked them through each clause, each provision, each carefully worded protection. This section here ensures that if the partnership dissolves, assets are divided equally, Chen explained. And this clause specifies that neither party can sell or mortgage the combined property without written consent from both parties. What about decision-making? Catherine asked. All major decisions require mutual agreement. In the event of a dispute, you'll bring in a neutral arbitrator. I've suggested myself, if you're both amenable. Catherine looked at Robert. He nodded. We're amenable, she said. Chen pushed the papers across the desk. Then, if you'll both sign here, here, and here, we'll make it official. Catherine picked up the pen, her hand steady. This was it. The moment she either trusted someone again or lost everything. She thought about Thomas, about his fists and his fury. She thought about the town's judgment, the failed ranch, the impossible cold of doing everything alone. Then she thought about Robert Jackson sitting on her porch in silence, asking for nothing, offering everything. She signed her name. Robert signed next to her, his signature bold and clear. Congratulations, Chen said. You're now legal partners. They walked out of that office as different people than they'd walked in. The ranch, both ranches, now legally one, wasn't saved yet. But it had a chance. They had a chance. So, Robert said as they stood on the street in the weak October sunlight. Partners. Partners, Catherine echoed. What now? She thought about the bank payment due tomorrow, about the combined resources they could now pool, about the work ahead. It was still enormous, still terrifying, still likely to fail, but for the first time in months she wasn't facing it alone. Now we get to work, Catherine said. Robert smiled. Yes, ma'am. They rode back to Catherine's ranch, their ranch now, side by side, and the evening sun painted everything gold. Winter was still coming, the town would still talk, the land would still fight them every step, but Catherine Walsh was done surviving alone. She had a partner now, and maybe, just maybe, that would make all the difference. The bank took the payment with barely concealed disappointment. Catherine watched the clerk count out the money. $347 exactly, pooled from Robert's savings and what little she'd scraped together, and marked the account current. No smile, no congratulations, just a stamped receipt and a curt nod. You're paid through December, the clerk said. Next payment due January 1st. Understood. Catherine folded the receipt carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. Behind her, Robert stood quiet, his presence a steady weight at her back. They walked out into the November chill, and Catherine felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. The immediate crisis was over. But now came the harder part, actually making the partnership work. "Well," Robert said as they untied their horses, "we bought ourselves 2 months, and 2 months to prove we're not completely insane." "Speak for yourself. I've made peace with being insane." Catherine surprised herself by laughing. Felt rusty, unused, but real. They rode to Robert's ranch first because Catherine had never seen it, and they needed to take inventory of what they were working with. The place sat in a shallow valley 5 miles south of Catherine's property, protected from the worst winds by low hills. The house was bigger than hers, better built, but it had the hollow feeling of a place where someone had stopped caring. "I haven't done much with it since Sarah died," Robert admitted as they dismounted. "Kept the basics running, but that's about it." Catherine could see it in the details. Fences mended but not replaced, a barn door that hung slightly crooked, gardens gone to weeds. The bones were good, but the spirit had gone out of the place. "How many head of cattle?" she asked. 22. Maybe 23 if that heifer in the north pasture didn't die over the summer. Combined with her 6, that gave them 28, maybe 29 cattle. Not enough to be profitable, but enough to build on. Chickens? Dozen or so. I'm not entirely sure. They kind of do their own thing. Catherine walked the property with him, noting what needed work and what could wait. The well was good, the barn structurally sound despite the crooked door, the pasture land decent. With both properties combined, they had 400 acres, enough to support 50 head comfortably, 70 if they managed it right. "We need more cattle," she said. "We need money to buy more cattle." "Can we breed what we have?" Robert considered. "Maybe, but breeding takes time, and we need income before January. The bank won't care about future cattle." Catherine chewed her lip, thinking. "What about horses? What about them? You've got that big mare, the one with good lines. I saw her when we rode in, and I've got Thomas's old gelding. He's mean, but he's sound. We could breed them, sell the foal come spring." "Horse breeding's risky. Foals can die, mares can have complications. Everything's risky," Catherine cut him off. "But a good foal could bring in $60, $70. Maybe more if we're lucky." Robert looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "You've thought about this." "I've had a lot of time to think." "All right, we'll try it. But we still need a plan for immediate income." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking both properties, making lists, arguing about priorities. Robert wanted to fix the fences first. Catherine insisted the barn roof was more urgent. They compromised. They'd patch the worst sections of fence and tarp the barn roof until spring. It was the first of many compromises. Working together was nothing like Catherine had imagined. In her head, she'd worried about Robert trying to take control, making decisions without her, treating her like hired help instead of a partner. But Robert had clearly learned from Sarah's death that life was too short for stupid pride. When Catherine had an idea, he listened. When they disagreed, they talked it through instead of one of them simply deciding. It was exhausting and strange and completely foreign to anything she'd experienced with Thomas. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Robert asked one afternoon as they mended fence in the freezing cold. "Like what?" "Like I'm going to suddenly turn into someone else." Catherine hammered a staple into a post, the impact jarring her sore hands. "I'm waiting for the catch." "What catch?" "The part where you decide partnership actually means you're in charge." She moved to the next section. "Men say things they don't mean all the time." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his breath misting in the cold air. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Thomas really did a number on you, didn't he?" "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." He set down his hammer. "Catherine, I can't prove to you that I mean what I say. Not with words. All I can do is show up every day and keep my word. And if that's not enough, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And if I can't learn to trust you, then we'll still be partners, just maybe not friends." The simplicity of it caught her off guard. No demands for her to change, no ultimatums, no wounded ego, just acceptance. "I'm working on it," she said quietly. "I know." They finished the fence as snow began to fall, fat flakes that stuck to their coats and melted on their faces. By the time they rode back to Catherine's house, the one they'd silently agreed would be their base since it was closer to town, both of them were half frozen and completely exhausted. Catherine started a fire while Robert saw to the horses. When he came back inside, she had coffee brewing and the last of some cornbread laid out. "This is the last of the food," she said. "I've got supplies at my place. I'll bring them over tomorrow. We should make a list, figure out what we need to get through winter." Robert pulled out a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper, and they started cataloging: flour, salt, coffee, beans, bacon if they could afford it, nails, wire, feed for the animals, medicine in case one of them got sick. The list grew quickly, and so did the estimated cost. "We're going to be eating a lot of beans," Catherine observed. "Could be worse." "How?" Robert thought about it. "We could be eating them without salt." She laughed despite herself, and the sound filled the small house with something that felt almost like warmth. But winter had just begun, and warmth was about to become a luxury. December arrived with the blizzard that lasted 3 days and buried the ranch under 2 feet of snow. Catherine and Robert spent those days huddled inside, burning through precious firewood and trying not to think about the cattle struggling in the storm. On the 4th day, when the wind finally died, they bundled up and went out to assess the damage. 2 cattle were dead, frozen in the north pasture where they'd tried to shelter against a rock outcropping. One of Robert's horses had colic from eating snow. The chicken coop had collapsed under the weight of the snow, and they found 4 dead birds in the wreckage. Catherine stood in the destroyed coop, her hands numb despite thick gloves, and felt something crack inside her chest. "We can't afford this," she said. Robert was silent. "We lost 2 cattle. That's $60, maybe $70 gone. The chickens were our egg income. The horse might die, and that's another $100. Her voice was rising, panic bleeding through. "We can't afford to lose anything else, Robert. We're already running on fumes." "I know." "Then what do we do?" He looked at her, his face red from cold and worry. "We rebuild the coop. We dose the horse with mineral oil and hope the colic passes. We salvage what meat we can from the dead cattle and smoke it. And we keep going." "That's not a plan." "It's all we've got." Catherine wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, hit something, break down completely, but there was no room for breaking down when survival hung by such a thin thread. So she swallowed the scream and nodded. "Let's start with the coop." They worked through the day rebuilding what the storm had destroyed. Catherine's hands bled through her gloves. Her back screamed. The cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. But they didn't stop, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging how close they were to losing everything. By nightfall, they had a functioning coop and 8 surviving chickens. The horse was still sick but stable. The cattle meat was packed in snow, waiting to be smoked. They sat in Catherine's kitchen, too tired to cook, eating cold cornbread and drinking weak coffee. "We should check Robert's place tomorrow," Catherine said. "Make sure the storm didn't damage anything there." "Probably wise. And we need to start thinking about January's payment." Robert rubbed his face. "One crisis at a time." "We don't have the luxury of one crisis at a time." "Catherine." He looked at her, and she saw the same exhaustion she felt reflected in his eyes. "We're doing everything we can. Sometimes that has to be enough." "And when it's not?" He didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, they rode to Robert's ranch and found his main water pipe had frozen and burst, flooding part of the barn. They spent another full day fixing it, rerouting water, cleaning up the damage. By the time they finished, Catherine's clothes were soaked and she was shivering so hard she could barely hold the reins on the ride back. "You need to warm up," Robert said when they reached her house. "I'm fine." "You're shaking like a leaf. Get inside." She wanted to argue, but her body was betraying her, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Robert helped her off her horse. She hated needing help, but couldn't quite manage alone, and practically carried her inside. "Clothes off," he said. "What?" "You're soaked through. You'll catch pneumonia." He was already building up the fire, his back to her. "Change into something dry. I won't look." Catherine's pride warred with survival. Survival won. She peeled off her wet clothes with shaking hands, pulled on a dry dress, and huddled by the fire. Robert kept his word, never turned around, just kept feeding wood into the flames until the room was warm. "Better?" he asked, still facing away. "Getting there." Only then did he turn, and his face was tight with worry. "That was stupid, both of us working in wet clothes all day." "Had to be done." "Not at the cost of your health." My health is fine. Catherine, I said I'm fine. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she saw him flinch. She took a breath. I'm sorry. I can't be weak right now. We can't afford it. Robert sat down across from her, his own clothes still damp, exhaustion written in every line of his body. You're not weak, he said quietly. You're human. There's a difference. Humans die out here. So do people who won't admit they have limits. They stared at each other across the fire, and Catherine felt something shift between them, some acknowledgement of how tenuous this all was, how easily it could fall apart. I'm scared, she admitted. All the time. I'm scared we're going to lose everything anyway, and this partnership will have been for nothing. Me too, Robert said. Really? Every damn day. I'm terrified I'm going to fail you the way I failed Sarah. Catherine's throat went tight. You didn't fail Sarah. She got sick. I know that in my head. But my heart, he tapped his chest, my heart says I should have done something. Anything. And now I'm watching you work yourself to death trying to save this place, and I'm terrified history is going to repeat itself. I'm not going to die. You don't know that. Neither do you. They sat in the firelight, two broken people trying to build something functional from the pieces of their shattered lives. It shouldn't work. By all logic, it was doomed to fail. But Catherine was tired of logic. We'll make it, she said. How do you know? Because we're too stubborn to die quietly. Robert laughed, the sound rough but genuine. Yeah, I guess we are. Christmas came and went unmarked. They couldn't afford celebration, couldn't spare the time or resources for anything beyond basic survival. But on Christmas Eve, Robert showed up with a scraggly pine branch he'd cut from the hills and a single candle. Thought we should mark the day somehow, he said, almost embarrassed. Catherine stared at the branch, at the flickering candle, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. It was small and probably foolish, but it was something. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together that evening, the candle burning on the table between them, and talked about nothing important. Childhood memories, favorite foods, places they'd never been, but might like to see someday. It was the first time since the partnership began that they weren't talking about work or problems or the ever-present specter of failure. It was, Catherine realized, the first time in years she'd felt almost peaceful. But peace, like everything else out here, was temporary. The well failed on December 28th. Catherine went out to draw water for the morning and found the bucket coming up empty. She tried again. Still empty. Panic rose in her throat as she peered down into the darkness and saw nothing but dry stone. Robert! Her voice cracked. Robert, the well's dry. He came running from the barn, took one look at her face, and his own went pale. He checked the well himself, dropping a stone and counting the seconds until it hit bottom. It took too long. Way too long. It's dropped, he said. The water table's dropped below the well depth. Can we dig it deeper? Not in winter. The ground's frozen solid. Then what do we do? Catherine heard her voice rising, hysteria creeping in. We can't survive without water. The animals can't. There's a spring on my property, Robert interrupted. About a mile from here. We'll have to haul water. A mile? Every day? In this cold? You have a better idea? She didn't, and that was the worst part. They started hauling water the next morning, making the trek twice a day with barrels loaded onto a makeshift sled pulled by Robert's horse. It added hours to their already impossible workload, and the physical toll was brutal. Catherine's hands, already raw from constant work, developed blisters that bled and froze. Her shoulders screamed from hauling weight they weren't built to carry. By New Year's Day, she was running on fumes. And then the horse threw a shoe, and then 3 more cattle died. And then Catherine woke up one morning, tried to get out of bed, and simply couldn't. Her body had quit, just stopped responding. She lay there staring at the ceiling and felt nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness where her will to fight used to be. Robert found her like that an hour later when she didn't show up to help with the morning chores. Catherine? He knocked, then opened the door when she didn't answer. Are you... He stopped, taking in the scene. What's wrong? I can't do it anymore, she said to the ceiling. Her voice was flat, dead. I can't get up. I can't haul another bucket of water. I can't fix another fence or bury another cow or pretend that any of this matters when we're just going to lose it anyway. Robert stood in the doorway, silent. You should leave, Catherine continued. Dissolve the partnership. Cut your losses before I drag you down with me. No. Robert, no. He came into the room, pulled up the single chair, and sat beside her bed. I'm not leaving. I'm done. I've got nothing left. Then I'll have enough for both of us. Catherine finally turned her head to look at him. Why? Why would you stay when I'm telling you I'm finished? Because you stayed, Robert said simply. When you could have taken my loan and kept your distance. When you could have married someone rich and escaped all this. When you could have given up 100 times over, you stayed. You fought. And if you're too tired to fight right now, then I'll fight for you until you can fight again. Tears slid from the corners of her eyes, hot against her cold skin. I'm so tired. I know. I don't think I can keep doing this. Then don't. Not today. Robert reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. Today you rest. I'll handle everything. And tomorrow, if you're still too tired, I'll handle it again. And the day after that, however long it takes. The partnership means we carry each other when one of us can't walk. Right now, that's you. So let me carry you. Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, that she could handle it, that she didn't need anyone. But the lies wouldn't come. She was too tired for lies. Okay, she whispered. Robert stayed with her for an hour, just sitting in that chair, holding her hand. He didn't try to fix her or lecture her or make her feel guilty for breaking down. He just stayed. And somehow that was enough to keep the darkness from swallowing her whole. For 3 days, Catherine barely left her bed. Robert handled everything, the water hauling, the animals, the endless maintenance that kept the ranch barely functioning. He brought her food she could barely eat, tea that she sipped without tasting, and silence when words would have been too heavy. On the 4th day, she got up, not because she was healed or recovered or suddenly full of hope, but because she heard Robert outside, struggling with something heavy, and her body moved before her mind could stop it. She found him trying to repair the barn door alone, a job that really needed 2 people. What are you doing? Her voice was rusty from disuse. Robert turned, surprise flickering across his face. Catherine, you should be resting. I've rested enough. She walked over, still shaky but upright. You need help with that. I can manage. Robert. He looked at her, really looked, and whatever he saw made him nod. Yeah, I could use help. They worked together in the weak January sunlight, and Catherine felt something shift inside her. Not hope. She wasn't ready for hope yet, but maybe acceptance. Acceptance that this was hard, that she was allowed to struggle, that needing help didn't make her weak. That evening, as they sat together reviewing their finances for the upcoming bank payment, Robert spoke carefully. I've been thinking. About? About us. This partnership. He set down the ledger. It's not working the way we planned. Catherine's stomach dropped. You want out. No, I want more. I don't understand. Robert turned to face her fully. We're barely surviving because we're splitting ourselves between 2 properties, 2 houses, 2 sets of responsibilities. We're wasting time and resources traveling back and forth. What if we consolidated? You mean live in the same house? Yes. Catherine's mind raced. People already talk if we're living together without being married. Let them talk. We're already scandalous. Might as well be practical, too. Which house? This one. It's closer to town, and honestly, I hate going back to my place. Too many ghosts. Catherine understood ghosts. Her whole life with Thomas was a ghost that haunted every corner of this house. What about appearances? She asked. What about survival? Robert countered. Catherine, we're trying to run a 400-acre ranch with 2 people. That's hard enough without adding unnecessary complications. If we're in the same place, we can coordinate better, work more efficiently, actually have conversations that don't require riding 5 miles. He wasn't wrong. The logistics alone would save them hours every day. Separate rooms, Catherine said. Of course. And if it doesn't work, then we go back to the way it was. No harm done. Catherine thought about it. Thought about the gossip, the judgment, the very real possibility that this would destroy what little reputation she had left. Then she thought about hauling water in the freezing cold, about dying cattle and failed wells and the sheer exhausting loneliness of trying to survive alone. All right, she said, but we tell the town it's purely practical. Business partners sharing resources. They won't believe us. I don't care if they believe us. I care that we say it. Robert smiled. Deal. He moved in 2 days later, bringing what few possessions he'd kept after Sarah died. They set him up in the small bedroom that used to be Thomas's office, and Catherine tried not to think about how strange it was to have someone in the house who didn't make her flinch. The town's reaction was exactly as predictable as it was irrelevant. Living in sin, Mrs. Henderson proclaimed loudly at church. Practical arrangement, Samuel Chen's wife countered just as loudly. The debate raged for days, but Catherine and Robert were too busy working to care. And the truth was, consolidating had been the right choice. They saved hours every day, coordinated better, worked more efficiently. The ranch still struggled, but it struggled less. January's bank payment came together through sheer determination and selling everything that wasn't nailed down. They made it with $6 to spare. February loomed ahead, and with it, another payment, another month, another battle. But as Catherine stood in the yard one evening, watching Robert fix the fence in the dying light, she realized something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that meant they had a chance. Spring came late and grudging, the winter refusing to release its grip until well into March. But when it finally arrived, it brought something Catherine had almost forgotten existed. Possibility. The first green shoots appeared in the pastures, tender and stubborn, pushing through the last patches of dirty snow. The cattle, lean from the hard winter but alive, began to put on weight. And Robert's mare, the one they'd bred back in November, started to show. She's definitely carrying, Robert said one morning, his hand on the mare's swollen belly. Should foal sometime in April. Catherine watched from the fence rail, coffee cup warming her hands. That's assuming nothing goes wrong. Always the optimist. Someone has to be realistic. There's realistic and there's borrowing trouble. Robert gave the mare a final pat and walked over to lean against the fence beside Catherine. We made it through winter. That counts for something. We made it by the skin of our teeth. Still counts. She couldn't argue with that. Against all odds, they'd survived. The ranch hadn't flourished. It had barely functioned, but they'd kept the bank at bay, kept most of the animals alive, and kept themselves from freezing or starving. By the standards of their situation, that was a victory. Living together had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Robert rose early, started the fire and coffee, then headed out to handle the morning chores. Catherine woke to warmth and caffeine, a small luxury that still felt strange after years of Thomas's demands. They'd split the work according to ability rather than tradition. Robert handled the heavy lifting and anything requiring height, while Catherine managed the books, the planning, and the intricate repair work her smaller hands could navigate better. It wasn't perfect. They still argued about priorities, still stepped on each other's nerves in the close quarters, still carried their individual damage like invisible weight. But they were learning each other's patterns, learning how to work around the sharp edges. We need to talk about summer, Catherine said, refilling her coffee from the pot Robert had left warming by the fire. What about it? We're going to need more income. The foal will help if it sells, but that's one payment. We need something sustainable. Robert nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. What if we diversified? Meaning? Right now we're all in on cattle, but cattle prices are unpredictable and we don't have enough head to make real money. What if we added something else? Sheep, maybe. Or we could contract out for hay. There's a few ranches around here might pay for good timothy if we can grow it. Catherine considered. Sheep need shearing, and neither of us knows how. We could learn. We could also fail expensively. So hay then. Hay needs equipment we don't have. A mower, a rake, a way to bale it. They went back and forth, each idea hitting a wall of practicality or resources they didn't possess. It was frustrating but familiar. Every decision felt like navigating a minefield where one wrong step could destroy everything they'd built. What about horses? Robert said finally. We're already breeding the mare. No, I mean breaking and training. There's always demand for good working horses. If we could buy a few green horses cheap, put training into them, we could sell them for double, maybe triple. Catherine turned that over. You know how to break horses? Sarah and I used to do it. Before. His voice went quiet on that last word. the way it always did when he mentioned his late wife. It's hard work. Everything's hard work. And dangerous. Catherine, breathing out here is dangerous. She laughed despite herself. Fair point. All right, let's try it. But we start small. One horse. See if we can actually do this before we commit. Deal. They shook on it, their hands rough and scarred from the winter's labor, and Catherine felt that unfamiliar flutter again. Not quite hope, but its cousin. Momentum. The first horse Robert brought home was a disaster. A rancher 2 counties over had a 3-year-old gelding that had thrown his son and earned a reputation as unrideable. He sold the animal to Robert for $20, probably thrilled to be rid of it. This is what $20 buys, Robert said as he led the horse into their corral. The gelding was wild-eyed and fighting the lead rope, muscles bunched with fear or fury or both. That horse is going to kill you, Catherine observed. Probably. Robert, I'm joking, mostly. He studied the animal with the kind of focus Catherine had learned meant he was already 10 steps ahead, planning his approach. He's scared, not mean. That's workable. Catherine watched from a safe distance as Robert began the slow process of gentling the horse. It wasn't dramatic or quick like the stories made it seem. It was hours of patient, repetitive work, approaching, retreating, letting the animal learn that humans didn't always mean pain. By the end of the first week, Robert could touch the gelding without getting bitten. By the end of the second, he had a saddle on it. By the end of the third, he was riding it around the corral. You're going to get yourself killed for a $40 profit, Catherine said one evening as Robert limped in, clearly having been thrown at some point during the day. 60 if we're lucky. Not worth it. Says the woman who climbed on the roof in a blizzard to clear the chimney. He had her there. The gelding sold 3 weeks later for $55 to a merchant who needed a reliable pack animal. Catherine watched Robert count the money with something that might have been pride. Okay, she admitted. Maybe you were right. Was that a compliment? Don't let it go to your head. But they bought 2 more horses with part of the profit, and Robert started the process again. It was slow income, unpredictable, occasionally dangerous. But it was something they could do with the resources they had, and in their situation, that made it precious. April brought the foal, a filly with good lines and her mother's steady temperament. Catherine found herself standing at the fence watching the gangly creature nurse and felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. Beautiful, isn't she? Robert said, appearing beside her. She's knobby. All foals are knobby. She'll grow into it. Catherine didn't answer, too busy wrestling with the strange tightness behind her ribs. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling. Longing. Not for a horse, but for something the foal represented. New life, fresh starts, the possibility of something good coming from their efforts. You all right? Robert asked. Yeah, just thinking. About? Nothing important. But it was important, and they both knew it. They just weren't ready to name it yet. The town's opinion of their arrangement had calcified into predictable camps. Half thought they were living in sin and destroying the moral fabric of decent society. The other half thought they were proving a business model and should be left alone. The arguments raged in church socials and general stores, but increasingly Catherine found she didn't care. Let them talk. She and Robert were too busy surviving to worry about reputation, but not everyone had given up on intervention. Martin Coyle showed up one afternoon in May, riding onto the property like he owned it. Catherine was in the garden, trying to coax life from soil that seemed determined to grow only rocks, when she heard the hoofbeats. Mrs. Walsh. Coyle dismounted, his smile as oily as she remembered. You're looking well. What do you want, Martin? Just checking in, making sure you're managing out here. I'm managing fine. Are you, though? He looked around pointedly, at the still shabby house, the leaning fence they hadn't gotten to yet, the garden that was more optimism than productivity. Seems to me you're barely holding on, and now I hear you're living with Jackson, sharing a house. We're business partners. That's not what people are saying. Catherine straightened, her back protesting. Then people need better hobbies. Catherine. Coyle's voice took on a paternal tone that made her skin crawl. I'm trying to help you. This situation, it's not proper, it's not safe, and a woman needs a husband, real protection, not some partnership arrangement that's going to fall apart the first time things get hard. Things are already hard. We're managing. For how long? Coyle stepped closer, and Catherine fought the urge to step back. Winter nearly broke you. Everyone knows it. And next winter will be just as bad, probably worse. How long before Jackson realizes he made a bad investment and cuts his losses? Robert's not going anywhere. How do you know? The question hit closer to home than Catherine wanted to admit. How did she know? What proof did she have beyond his word and 3 months of showing up? Because I do, she said, hating how weak it sounded. Catherine. Coyle's voice dropped, almost gentle. My offer still stands. Marry me. I'll buy out Jackson's share of the partnership, take over the ranch properly, and you'll never have to worry about, no, you didn't let me finish. I don't need to. Catherine met his eyes, feeling that old defiance rising. I said no 6 months ago. I'm saying no now, and I'll keep saying no until you stop asking. Coyle's face hardened. You're making a mistake. It's mine to make. He stared at her for a long moment, something ugly working in his expression. Then he mounted his horse in one angry motion. When this partnership fails, and it will fail, don't come crying to me, he said. Wouldn't dream of it. He rode off, and Catherine stood there shaking, her hands clenched so tight her nails cut into her palms. She hated that he'd gotten to her, hated that his words had found the soft spots in her armor and pressed. How long have you been standing there? She said without turning around. Robert stepped out from the barn, his face carefully neutral. Long enough. You should have intervened. You didn't need me to. You handled it. He's not wrong, though, Catherine said quietly. We are barely holding on, and winter will come again, and we don't know if we can survive another one. No, we don't. Robert walked over to stand beside her, both of them looking at the garden that refused to thrive. But we didn't know if we'd survive the last one either, and here we are. That's not a plan. Since when has anything we've done been part of a plan? Catherine laughed, the sound sharp but real. Fair point. They stood together in the afternoon sun, two people held together by stubbornness and necessity, and something else neither of them was quite ready to examine too closely. For what it's worth, Robert said, I'm not going anywhere. People always say that. I know, but I mean it. How can I believe that? Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something Catherine couldn't quite name. Because you're the first thing that's made me want to stay since Sarah died. This ranch, this partnership, it's given me a reason to care again. And I'm not walking away from that. Catherine's throat went tight. Robert, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He walked back to the barn, leaving Catherine standing in the stubborn garden with tears threatening and her heart doing complicated things in her chest. Summer brought better weather and worse problems. The cattle started dying again, not from cold this time, but from some kind of illness no one could identify. They lost 4 head in 2 weeks, each death a financial blow they couldn't afford. We need a veterinarian, Catherine said after they buried the 4th cow. Can't afford one. We can't afford to keep losing cattle. Robert wiped sweat and dirt from his face, exhaustion written in every line of his body. What do you want me to do, Catherine? We're already running on fumes. There's no money for a vet. Then we make money. How? I don't know, but we figure something out because we don't have a choice. They were both frayed, both scared, both reaching the end of their patience with a situation that seemed designed to break them. The argument that followed was their worst yet, loud and mean and full of things they'd both been holding back for months. Maybe Coyle was right, Robert said at one point, his voice cold. Maybe this partnership was a bad investment. The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. So that's it? Things get hard and you're done? I didn't say that. You just said I was a bad investment. I said the partnership, which includes me. Catherine heard her voice breaking but couldn't stop it. I'm the partnership, Robert. My land, my debt, my failure. So if it's a bad investment, then I'm a bad investment, and maybe you should just leave like everyone said you would. Catherine, no. You know what? Go. Get out. I survived before you, and I'll survive after you. Robert stared at her, something wounded in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out, and Catherine heard his horse ride away a few minutes later. She stood in the empty house, shaking with anger and fear, and the horrible certainty that she'd just destroyed the best thing that had happened to her in years. He didn't come back that night, or the next morning. By noon of the second day, Catherine was spiraling. This was it. She'd finally pushed too hard, demanded too much, been too broken for anyone to handle. Robert had realized she wasn't worth the effort, and left, just like everyone eventually did. She was sitting on the porch steps, trying to figure out how to run the ranch alone again, when she heard hoofbeats. Robert rode in looking exhausted and determined, with a man Catherine didn't recognize following behind. "This is James Rivera," Robert said without preamble. "He's a veterinarian from Santa Fe. Cost me $30 to get him here, but he's going to look at the cattle." Catherine stood, her heart doing something complicated. You came back." "Of course I came back." Robert dismounted, his eyes meeting hers. "I said I wasn't going anywhere. Did you really think one fight would change that?" I know what you thought, and I'm sorry I said what I said. The partnership's not a bad investment. It's the best decision I've ever made." He looked at her steadily. "You're the best decision I've ever made." Rivera cleared his throat. "Should I come back later?" "No," Catherine said quickly, wiping at her eyes. "No, please. The cattle are in the south pasture." Rivera examined the sick cattle while Catherine and Robert stood together in awkward silence. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I'm sorry, too, for telling you to leave. You were scared." "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's an explanation." Robert's hand found hers, rough and warm. "We're going to fight, Catherine. We're two stubborn people under impossible pressure. But fighting doesn't mean leaving. It just means we're both still here, still trying. I don't know how to trust that." "I know. So I'll just keep showing up until you do." Rivera interrupted before Catherine could respond, but she held on to Robert's hand a moment longer, something shifting and settling in her chest. The diagnosis was anthrax, a bacterial infection that could wipe out the entire herd if not contained. Rivera gave them a treatment protocol: isolate the sick animals, burn the bodies of the dead ones, disinfect everything. "This is going to cost you," he warned. "The medicine alone is expensive." "How much?" Catherine asked. $40, maybe $50. Robert and Catherine exchanged glances. They didn't have $40. They barely had $4. "We'll figure it out," Robert said. After Rivera left with the promise to return in a week with the medicine, Catherine and Robert sat on the porch and faced reality. "We could sell the foal," Catherine said quietly. "She's not ready. We'd get half what she's worth. Half is better than nothing. We need that full price for the bank." "Then what?" Robert was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I could sell some of my land. The parcel by the creek. It's good land. Someone would buy it." "No." Catherine turned to face him. "We're not breaking up the ranch. It's just one piece that... Today it's one piece, tomorrow it's another. That's how Thomas lost everything, selling off parts bit by bit until there was nothing left." She shook her head. "There has to be another way." They sat in silence, the weight of impossible choices pressing down. "What if we asked for help?" Catherine said finally. "From who?" "The town. Not charity, but loans from multiple people. Small amounts that are easier to pay back." Robert looked skeptical. "The same town that thinks we're living in sin? The same town that has farmers and ranchers who understand that disease doesn't respect judgment. Anthrax in our herd could spread to theirs. They have a vested interest in helping us contain it." It was a long shot, but it was something. They spent the next 2 days visiting every ranch and farm within 10 miles, explaining the situation and asking for help. Some doors slammed in their faces. Others offered sympathy, but no money. But a few, enough, understood the threat and were willing to loan small amounts with reasonable terms. Jacob Garrett surprised them by offering $10. Samuel Chen's wife added 5 more. Even Peter Larson, the stammering boy who'd proposed to Catherine, contributed $3 with a shy smile. "Heard you're doing good work out there," he said. "Both of you." By the end of the week, they'd cobbled together $42. Enough for the medicine and a little left over. Rivera returned as promised, treated the sick cattle, and left strict instructions for care. "Check them twice daily. Any signs of relapse, you send for me immediately." "We will," Catherine promised. The cattle recovered slowly. They lost 2 more before the medicine took hold, but the rest survived. By the end of summer, the crisis had passed, and Catherine and Robert had a new debt to manage. but one divided among many people, none of whom owned them. "We did it," Robert said one evening, watching the healthy cattle graze. "We got lucky. We got help. There's a difference." Catherine considered that. All her life, she'd equated help with obligation, with losing control, with becoming beholden. But the townspeople who'd loaned them money hadn't asked for anything beyond repayment. They'd helped because it was practical, because it protected their own herds, because maybe, just maybe, some of them were starting to see that Catherine and Robert were building something worth preserving. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up. On the ranch. On the partnership." She paused. "On me." Robert turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster. "Okay. This partnership, it's not enough anymore." The words hit like cold water. "What?" "Let me finish." He took a breath. "When we started this, it was about survival, about pooling resources and making it through winter. But somewhere along the way, it became about more than that. At least for me." Catherine's hands were trembling. "Robert, I love you." The words came out rushed, like he'd been holding them back for months. "I love your stubbornness and your strength and the way you refuse to quit even when everything's against you. I love how you argue with me when you think I'm wrong, and how you handle cattle, and how you look in the morning with your hair all messy. And I know this complicates things. And I know you might not feel the same way. But I had to tell you because I can't." Catherine kissed him. It was clumsy and unexpected and tasted like coffee and dust, but it was real. When she pulled back, Robert looked stunned. "I thought you—" "I'm terrified," Catherine interrupted. "I'm terrified of feeling this way because the last time I trusted a man, it nearly destroyed me. But I'm more terrified of pushing you away and losing what we have. So you— I love you too, you idiot." Robert laughed, the sound bright and relieved, and pulled her into a proper kiss. This one was slower, deeper, full of months of tension and fear and carefully hidden hope finally allowed to surface. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Robert rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Catherine stiffened. "Robert, not because we have to, not because it's practical or expected, but because I want to build a life with you, not just a ranch. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning and know you're mine and I'm yours. The partnership can become something more, or stay exactly as it is, but with rings." Robert pulled back to look at her. "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Catherine. I'm asking you to choose something. Choose us. Choose this." Catherine's mind raced through 1,000 objections. Marriage had meant prison before. It had meant losing herself, losing control, losing everything that made her who she was. But Robert wasn't Thomas. Robert had proven that 100 times over, in his patience, his respect, his willingness to fight beside her instead of over her. "I need time," she said. "Take all the time you need. And I need promises. Name them. The ranch stays jointly owned. Equal partnership, equal decision-making. Marriage doesn't change that." "Agreed. And if you ever raise a hand to me, if you ever try to control me or diminish me or make me small, I will leave, and I will take my half of everything with me." Robert's face was serious. "I promise I will never raise a hand to you. And if I ever make you feel controlled or small, you tell me immediately so I can fix it. Deal?" "Deal." "So is that a yes?" Catherine looked at him. This man who'd sat with her in silence, who'd carried her when she couldn't walk, who'd fought beside her through the worst winter of her life, and never once demanded anything she wasn't willing to give. "Ask me again in a month," she said. Robert smiled. "I can do that." He asked her again exactly 1 month later, on a clear September evening, with the sun painting everything gold. Catherine said yes. They married in October, a small ceremony at Harold Chen's office, with just Chen and his wife as witnesses. No church, no crowd, no judgment. Just two people choosing each other with clear eyes and full knowledge of exactly how hard the road ahead would be. Catherine wore a simple blue dress. Robert wore his best shirt, the one without any patches. They signed the papers that made their partnership a marriage, and Chen pronounced them husband and wife with a smile that suggested he'd known this was coming all along. "Congratulations," he said. "Try not to make me divorce you in 6 months." "No promises," Catherine said, and Robert laughed. They rode back to the ranch together as the sun set, and for the first time since Thomas died, Catherine felt something she'd almost forgotten: peace. Not the absence of struggle, there would always be struggle, but the presence of someone to struggle alongside. That night, Robert carried her over the threshold of the house that was truly theirs now, and Catherine let herself be carried, let herself trust, let herself fall into something she'd spent so long protecting herself against. Love. Messy and complicated and absolutely terrifying. But theirs. Marriage didn't fix anything, which was exactly what Catherine had expected and somehow still found disappointing. The morning after their wedding, she woke to the same leaking roof, the same ornery cattle, the same impossible arithmetic of trying to make a ranch profitable. The only difference was the ring on her finger, a simple silver band Robert had bought with money they probably shouldn't have spent, and the man sleeping beside her, his face soft in the early light. Catherine studied him for a moment, this person she'd chosen to tie her life to. He was snoring slightly, one arm thrown over his head, completely unaware that she was having a small crisis of faith. What had she done? What if this was a mistake? What if— "You're thinking too loud," Robert mumbled without opening his eyes. "I'm not thinking anything." "You're definitely thinking something. I can hear the gears grinding from here." Catherine huffed. "I was just wondering if we made the right choice." That got his eyes open. He turned to look at her, sleep-rumpled and concerned. "Are you having regrets?" "I don't know. Maybe. Ask me after coffee." Robert pulled her close, and Catherine let herself be held, her head against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. Steady, reliable there. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think we made the right choice, but I also think we're allowed to be scared about it." "You're scared?" "Terrified. I'm married to a woman who could probably run this ranch better without me, and I'm constantly worried I'm going to mess it up." Catherine pulled back to look at him. "You really think I could run it better without you? You ran it alone for months before I showed up. I was failing. You were surviving. There's a difference." They lay there in this growing light, two imperfect people trying to build something functional from broken pieces, and Catherine felt the panic settle. Not disappear. She didn't think it would ever fully disappear, but become manageable. "Coffee?" she said. "Coffee," Robert agreed. The ranch demanded their attention before they'd finished their first cup. One of the horses had gotten into the feed barn overnight and gorged itself, and now it was colicking badly. Robert spent the morning walking the animal in circles while Catherine measured out mineral oil and tried not to think about what losing another horse would cost them. "This is a terrible honeymoon," she said as Robert passed by on his 10th lap. "Could be worse." "How?" "Could be raining." As if summoned by the words, the sky opened up. Within minutes, they were both soaked, the horse was miserable, and Catherine was laughing despite everything because of course this was their honeymoon. Of course. The horse survived, though it took most of the day. By evening, Catherine and Robert were exhausted, filthy, and standing in their kitchen eating cold beans straight from the pot because neither of them had the energy to cook. "We should probably consummate this marriage at some point," Robert said between bites. Catherine snorted. "Romantic." "I'm just saying we've got a legal obligation. We have a colicky horse and 3 hours of sleep between us. The legal obligation can wait." "Fair enough." They fell into bed that night too tired for anything but sleep, and Catherine decided that was fine. They had time. They had the rest of their lives to figure out the complicated parts. The first real test of their marriage came 3 weeks later when Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few days, the nausea, the exhaustion that went beyond normal ranch work tiredness, the way her breasts hurt when she moved too fast. But she'd pushed the thoughts away because getting pregnant now, when they were barely holding the ranch together, when they'd just gotten married, when everything was still so fragile, it was terrible timing. She told Robert over breakfast, the words coming out flat and scared. "I'm pregnant." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been sick every morning for a week and my cycle's late." Robert set down his fork carefully. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified. We can't afford this. We couldn't afford anything we've done." "This is different. This is a person, Robert. A whole human being who's going to need things we don't have. We'll figure it out." "That's not a plan." "Catherine." Robert reached across the table, took her hand. Look at me. We'll figure it out, just like we've figured out everything else. What if we can't? Then we'll fail together. But I don't think we will. Catherine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that somehow they'd make it work. But the numbers in the ledger told a different story. Barely breaking even, debts still outstanding, winter coming again. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. But also, Robert's face did something complicated. I'm happy. Is that okay? To be scared and happy at the same time? Catherine felt tears threaten and blinked them back. Yeah, I think that's okay. The pregnancy changed things in ways both practical and profound. Catherine could no longer do the heavy lifting, which meant Robert's workload doubled. She got violently sick most mornings, which cut into the time they could work, and her emotions, normally kept tightly controlled, were suddenly all over the place. She cried over a dead chicken, yelled at Robert for moving her tools, sat on the porch at sunset and felt overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of the light on the hills. I don't recognize myself, she told Robert one evening after she'd sobbed over a broken wagon wheel. You're growing a person. That seems like a decent excuse for being a little off. A little? Okay, a lot. But I signed up for better or worse, and this is just weird. Not worse, just weird. Catherine laughed through her tears. This is definitely weird. The town's reaction to the pregnancy was predictably mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them. Others muttered about the unseemly rush from partnership to marriage to baby. But Catherine found she cared less with each passing day. Let them talk. She had bigger problems. Winter came early that year, and it came hard. The first snow fell in mid-November, and by December they were buried under storms that seemed determined to finish what the previous winter had started. But this time was different. This time they were prepared. Supplies laid in, animals sheltered properly, systems in place. This time they weren't just surviving separately, they were working as a unit. And this time, when Catherine woke up bleeding in the middle of a January night, she wasn't alone. Robert, her voice cut through the darkness, sharp with fear. Something's wrong. He was awake instantly. What is it? I'm bleeding, not a lot, but... Her hand went to her stomach. The baby. Robert lit the lamp with shaking hands, and they both saw the blood on the sheets. Not hemorrhaging, but enough to terrify. I'll get the doctor, Robert said, already reaching for his clothes. You can't ride in this storm. I'm not losing you or this baby because of weather. Robert, I'm going. Stay in bed. Don't move. He was gone before she could argue, riding into a storm that should have kept anyone sane indoors. Catherine lay in the bed, her hand on her stomach, and prayed to forces she didn't quite believe in that both her husband and her baby would survive the night. Robert returned 3 hours later with Dr. Matthews, both of them half frozen and covered in snow. The doctor examined Catherine with cold hands and a worried expression. You're spotting, but the baby's heartbeat is still strong, he said finally. Complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. No work, no stress, minimal movement. I can't. You can, and you will, Robert interrupted. I'll handle everything. The ranch will survive. You need to focus on surviving. Dr. Matthews left instructions and rode back out into the storm, leaving Catherine and Robert alone with their fear. I'm sorry, Catherine said. For what? For being broken. Again, Robert sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers. You're not broken. You're pregnant, and you're scared, and your body's doing something hard. That's not broken. That's just being human. I hate being helpless. I know, but you're not helpless. You're resting. There's a difference. The next 2 weeks were torture for Catherine. She lay in bed while Robert ran the ranch alone, doing the work of 2 people and refusing to let her feel guilty about it. He brought her meals, read to her in the evenings, and only let his exhaustion show when he thought she was sleeping. The bleeding stopped after 4 days, but Dr. Matthews insisted on the full 2 weeks of rest. By the time Catherine was finally allowed up, she was stir-crazy and Robert looked like he'd aged 5 years. Never again, he said, when she finally came out to help with chores. We're not having more children. I can't do that again. We don't know that I'll have problems with the next one. Catherine, I nearly lost my mind. I can't. He stopped, his voice breaking. I can't watch you almost die again. Once with the pregnancy scare, once with the well collapse last year. I've got a limit, and I think I've hit it. Catherine understood. She'd felt the same fear lying in that bed, wondering if her body was going to betray her completely. One baby, she said. We'll see how it goes with this one, and then we'll decide. Deal. Spring arrived like a promise kept, warm and green and full of new growth. Catherine's belly grew with it, and by May she was visibly pregnant, moving slower but moving nonetheless. The ranch, against all odds, was actually starting to thrive. The cattle were healthy, the horse training business was bringing in steady income, and they'd even managed to pay off several of the small loans from townspeople. We might actually make it, Catherine said one evening, reviewing the ledger with something approaching optimism. Don't jinx it. I'm serious. Look, if we sell the spring calves at market price and the 3 horses Robert's training all sell, we'll have enough for the bank payment plus a cushion. Robert looked over her shoulder at the numbers. A whole cushion? Maybe $50. In our world, that's a fortune. Catherine laughed, her hand on her belly where the baby was kicking. Yeah, it is. The baby came in late June during a heat wave that made the house feel like an oven. Catherine's labor lasted 14 hours, long enough for Robert to wear a path in the floorboards with his pacing, short enough that Dr. Matthews said it was a good first birth. It's a girl, Matthews announced, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. Catherine took her daughter with shaking hands, and the world narrowed to just this: the weight of new life, the sound of crying, the feeling of something fundamentally shifting in her chest. She's perfect, Robert whispered, his hand on Catherine's shoulder. She's loud. Takes after her mother. Catherine would have hit him if she wasn't holding a baby. They named her Sarah, after Robert's first wife. Catherine had suggested it one night, and Robert had cried, which told her it was the right choice. Sarah would have loved her, he said, holding his daughter for the first time. I wish I could have met her. I wish you could have too. You two would have gotten along. Both stubborn as hell, both smarter than me. Low bar, Catherine teased, but her voice was gentle. Motherhood was nothing like Catherine expected, and exactly as hard as she'd feared. Sarah was colicky, screaming for hours every evening, no matter what they tried. Catherine was exhausted beyond measure, her body still healing, her mind foggy from lack of sleep. And the ranch didn't stop needing them just because they had a baby. Robert took on even more of the work, but there were things Catherine had to do. The bookkeeping, the planning, the 100 small decisions that kept everything running. She did them with Sarah strapped to her chest, the baby's screams rattling her skull while she tried to calculate feed costs. This is impossible, she said one night after Sarah had finally fallen asleep. I don't know how people do this. Poorly, Robert said. He looked as exhausted as Catherine felt. I think everyone's just doing it poorly and pretending otherwise. That's not encouraging. It's honest. Catherine laughed despite herself. Fair enough. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, it got easier. Sarah's colic eased, Catherine's body healed. They fell into a rhythm that was chaotic and exhausting, but functional. And the ranch kept growing. By Sarah's first birthday, they had 40 head of cattle, a thriving horse training business, and enough money in the bank to feel almost secure. Not rich. They'd probably never be rich, but stable. Solid. We did it, Catherine said one evening, watching Robert play with Sarah in the yard. We actually did it. Did what? Built something that works. A ranch that's profitable. A family that's happy. A life that's ours. Robert looked at her, Sarah giggling in his arms, the sunset painting everything gold. Yeah, he said softly. I guess we did. The years that followed weren't easy. Years on a ranch never were. But they were good. Sarah grew into a fierce, curious child who asked 1,000 questions and refused to accept "because I said so" as an answer. The ranch expanded, their reputation grew, and slowly the town's judgment faded into acceptance. Martin Coyle stopped making offers. Mrs. Henderson stopped clutching her pearls. Even Jacob Garrett admitted grudgingly that Catherine and Robert had proven him wrong. Never thought you'd make it, he said one day at the general store. Neither did we, Catherine replied honestly. But you did. Built something real out there. That counts for something. It did count. It counted for everything. Catherine was 35 when she stood in the yard one evening, watching Robert teach Sarah to ride on one of the gentled horses. The house behind her was solid now. They'd rebuilt the roof, fixed the walls, added a second bedroom. The fences were straight and strong. The cattle were healthy and numerous. This was what they'd fought for, this impossible, beautiful, hard-won life. "Mama, watch," Sarah called, and Catherine watched her daughter trot in a circle, fearless and grinning. "I'm watching, baby." Robert caught Catherine's eye across the yard and smiled, and she felt that old flutter. Not hope this time. They'd moved past hope into something more solid. Certainty, knowledge. This was real. This was theirs, and they'd built it together. That night, after Sarah was in bed and the chores were done, Catherine and Robert sat on the porch like they had all those years ago when they'd just been partners trying to survive. "Do you ever think about how we started?" Catherine asked. "All the time. Would you change anything?" Robert considered. "Maybe I'd have introduced myself sooner, saved us both some time." "I wouldn't have listened. I wasn't ready." "When did you get ready?" Catherine thought about it, about the proposals she'd rejected, the winter she'd nearly broken, the moment she'd signed those partnership papers with shaking hands. "I don't think I ever got ready," she said finally. "I think I just got tired of being alone." "That's not very romantic." "No, but it's true." Robert took her hand, his thumb tracing the silver ring that had worn smooth over the years. "You know what I learned from all this?" he said. "What?" "Strength isn't standing alone. It's knowing when to let someone stand beside you." Catherine looked at him. This man who'd asked nothing but given everything, who'd sat with her in silence and fought beside her through hell, who'd loved her through her fear and anger and stubborn refusal to trust. "I used to think independence meant not needing anyone," she said quietly. "But it doesn't. It means choosing who you need and choosing to be chosen back." Deep thoughts for a Thursday evening. "Shut up." Robert laughed and pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars came out one by one over the ranch they'd saved, the life they'd built, the family they'd become. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. There would be more hard winters, more sick cattle, more moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion, but they'd face it together. And that, Catherine had learned, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Sarah was grown and running the ranch with her own husband, Catherine would sit on that same porch and remember. Remember the girl who'd buried an abusive husband and stood alone against the world's expectations. Remember the partnership that became friendship, that became love. Remember the simple question that had changed everything. "May I just sit with you?" The answer had been yes. Reluctant at first, then gradual, then complete. And from that, yes. From that willingness to let someone in despite all her fear had come this entire life. This ranch, this family, this legacy of two broken people who'd refused to stay broken. Robert found her there one evening, her hair gray now, her hands gnarled from decades of work. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her with the ease of long practice. "The beginning." "Which beginning?" "When you asked to sit with me." Robert smiled, the expression crinkling his weathered face. "Best question I ever asked. Best answer I ever gave." They sat together in the sunset, two old people who'd survived everything life had thrown at them, and Catherine felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. She'd never been good at peace, but satisfaction, completion. She'd started as a woman who refused to bend, who'd rather break than compromise her hard-won independence. And she'd learned, slowly and painfully and beautifully, that true strength wasn't in standing alone. It was in choosing the right person to stand beside. The sunset faded and the stars came out, and Catherine Walsh, farmer, rancher, mother, wife, sat with the man she'd chosen and thought, this is what I fought for. This is what I won.